The cool autumn air swayed through the open door of David Miller's office, but the room itself was unwaveringly quiet. It seemed to him that music had been slipping through his fingers like sand in recent years. At 45, he was still a music teacher at one of Boston's most prestigious private schools, but the fears and resentments that had built up from a divorce and a long battle with his own illness had turned him into a shadow of his former self. Every morning he entered this classroom with a feigned confidence, carefully hiding the emptiness that had engulfed his soul. His fingers, once deftly handling the strings of the violin, now barely touched the keys of the piano, an instrument to which he had long since cooled. In this hall, full of flickering light and shadows, new sounds appeared, which sometimes seemed alien to it, and today, unexpectedly, alive. Emily Carter, a 16-year-old scholarship student from a poor area, crossed the threshold of the academy for the first time with a small Hungarian violin covered in traces of time. Her face was modest, her eyes shone with tired but real determination. She looked around awkwardly, feeling the crushing weight of unwritten rules and omnipresent snobbery. However, when asked to perform, surprisingly for a newcomer, she quietly took her place at the piano and began to play. The first chord sounded with such sincerity that the air in the room seemed to be electrified, and the walls, accustomed to the monotonous sound of yesterday's pieces, were mottled with soft shades of emotion. David could not tear his eyes away from her hands, which seemed to say more than words ever could. The sounds glided over the keys like rivers, gently washing away the fatigue from his consciousness. In each stroke, he felt the depth of loss and the desire to live, which he had long forgotten. Gradually, his cold arrogance gave way to sincere surprise and even respect. Emily, ignoring the mocking looks of Olivia Spencer, the daughter of a media mogul and the queen of the academy, played with such passion that her music made your heart burn. After she finished, the silence in the room seemed thicker than any rudeness. Even Olivia, glancing sideways at the audience, couldn't help but smile sarcastically. David, for the first time in a long time, felt something stir inside him, like the awakening of a tired ancient beast. It was the beginning of what he would later call redemption. But at that moment he simply held his breath, wondering who this girl was, whose performance had brought tears to his eyes. During the break, in the hallways filled with whispers and piercing glances, Emily exchanged a few subtle words with Zoe Wells, her constant support and friend who always helped her cope with her inner demons. But when Olivia's silhouette loomed on the horizon, glowing with confident malice, the air seemed to tighten. Olivia aimed her words at the ground, trying to belittle Emily's performance and make fun of her poor background. But the look Emily gave her in return defied all fear. She knew that real music was her salvation, and she was ready to fight for it to the end. Almost unnoticed by those around him, David watched this internal duel with a growing sense of responsibility, and for the first time in months, felt a surge of strength. His own story, filled with the bitterness of loss and self-abasement, washed over him like a wave. But now, instead of drowning, he wanted to swim toward the light that emanated from this fragile, but so resilient girl. He understood that this moment was not just a student's encounter with the elite school system, but the beginning of a journey that could change both of them. That evening in the music room, David sat at the piano listening to the echoes of memories with an involuntary trepidation when there was a knock at the door. Emily hesitantly asked if he could stay late to rehearse, as her violin was broken. Despite the internal struggle between cynicism and a desire to help, he nodded. In that late lamplight, surrounded by notes and silence, a new connection began to form between student and teacher. David gently guided her hand, building chords, and Emily slowly opened her soul to him, reminding him of her mother, whose love for music lived smoothly within her. In these moments of soft touches on the keys, an invisible picture of redemption unfolded, where past and present intertwined in a single stream. According to Emily's stories, her mother was not only her first music teacher, but also the key that opened up a whole world of feelings and hopes for the girl among the gray courtyards of the city. A heavy loss left a wound that music helped to heal, and poverty could not break the spirit. In this simplicity and depth, David saw a reflection of his own struggle, which had long been locked in the dungeon of inner despair. He opened up for the first time, about the struggle with alcoholism, about a broken marriage, about how music ceased to be a consolation for him, turning into torment. These confessions became the beginning of mutual healing, a bridge between two different worlds that unexpectedly intersected under the arches of an elite educational institution. Meanwhile, the jealousy and hostility continued. Olivia, unhappy with the growing attention Emily was receiving, began to attempt to tarnish her reputation, using the connections of her mother, Mrs. Spencer. She conversed disdainfully with Cassandra Brooks, a member of the school's wealthy elite, plotting to make Headmaster Thomas question the justice of his approach. Their words, filled with coldness and arrogance, poisoned the corridors of the academy, creating a vice that was squeezing the heart of the talented young pianist. But it was in those moments of silence and vulnerability that Emily felt how strong she had become thanks to the new lessons, the new feelings, and the faith of the teacher, who was no longer just a teacher, but became her mentor and protector. The swirl of these changes forced David to look at his work differently. The tiny classroom, where cold and alienation reigned before, was now filled with music, alive, real, and reviving. Each chord sounding under Emily's fingers seemed cathartic, not only for her, but for him as well. Their duet was not just a symphony of instruments, but a symphony of destinies, where pain and hope intertwined into a single harmony. In the girl's hands, that spark that seemed never to go out came to life, and her voice became the answer to the silent cries of the teacher's soul. Despite all the tension and struggle, a sense of mutual trust and support emerged between them, which was so necessary in a world where people often lose each other through the prism of social barriers. At that time, they both realized that music can heal wounds that words cannot. Emily became the light that brought David back to life, and he became her bridge to a world of possibilities, beyond which lay a dream. As the eve of the next school day hid the school and the first leaves rustled outside the windows, they both stood on the threshold of something new. The unknown ahead was both tempting and frightening, promising many trials, but also promising hope that sincerity and art would find a response in hearts. Their journey was just beginning, and ahead of them lay a whole story of music, redemption, and friendship that they would have to live. Thus, the invisible thread that bound the teacher and the student in the first hours of their journey together began to grow stronger and create the foundation on which new heights of inspiration and struggle would later emerge. A pause, filled with promises, froze in the darkness, and the receding shadow of the sunset light softly pointed the way forward. The first stars of their common destiny shone ahead, beckoning into the depths of new discoveries and trials, ready to reveal souls and hearts in the sounds that only the most sincere musicians spoke. An unexpected union and the first revelations. Emily scratched the strings of an old violin as the faint light from a street lamp filtered through the dim window of the music room. The last bell had rung, and all the students had gone home. But she still couldn't let go of the melody that lived in her soul. A passion that few knew about was born through the cracks of the old instrument. Zoe Wells knocked softly on the door and peered inside. "Emily, it's late. Are you alone again?" she asked, showing concern. Suddenly, the door swung open and David Miller walked into the hallway, his figure heavy and sullen. His face reflected fatigue and some inner struggle barely hidden under a mask of indifference. He noticed Emily playing and seemed to turn pale. Shortly after the clock announced that it was already late night, Principal Thomas Bennett called. His stern voice was full of reproach. "Who let you stay here alone after school?" David quickly defended the girl, reminding the principal of her talents and what she had to go through to get to this school. But Thomas's face remained as unmoved as the cold wind of northeast Boston. Emily looked sharply at David, hearing for the first time a hint of sincerity and support in his voice. Later that night, tired and anxious, David arranged for Emily to have the first of his surprise private lessons. He listened intently as her hands glided over the strings with such sincerity that a warm spark appeared in the cold classroom. At one point, when the silence lingered between notes, Emily began to talk about her mother, the woman who had lovingly nudged her toward music but had left too soon. The tears in her eyes and the timid words made her story not just a story, but a living testimony to the pain and hope entwined in her heart. David, stroking his chin, suddenly opened up. It was hard for him to talk about those days when music was just an echo of his former life. Divorce from his wife and battle with alcoholism had left deep scars, preventing him from finding himself again. But in the student's voice there was a strength he had long lost. In this silent confession, they found a common understanding of their falls and aspirations. Each new melody pushed back the barriers of alienation, changing the space between them into something almost sacred. In the evenings that followed, their music lessons turned into lively, wordless conversations. Their duet was like an ancient legend about two souls, one seeking forgiveness and the other seeking hope. Instead of a dull report on technique and chords, they shared their fears and dreams, letting the music speak for them. In the answers and pauses, a kind of tender chemistry was born, allowing them to forget about the outside world and the dangers that lurked in the shadows of an elite institution. Meanwhile, within the academy, a storm was brewing. Olivia Spencer, her pride backed by her financial might, held Emily in cynical contempt. Stories of late rehearsals and inappropriate behavior quickly reached Olivia's mother, Mrs. Spencer. A meeting with Principal Thomas suddenly became an arena for arrogant demands and threats. Mrs. Spencer, relying on her position and influence, insisted that the school turn its attention away from the scholarship winner and pay more attention to her daughter and her circle. Her words were cold and calculating, like a metal blade that slowly pierced the ideals of the school. The principal, a friend of David's for many years, found himself in a difficult dilemma. On the one hand, he valued the teacher's work and recognized Emily's talent. On the other, he felt a pressure that he could not simply turn away from. Shadows of morality and responsibility flickered in his eyes. How to preserve the honor of the academy without losing the souls of his best students? At that moment, it was the young girl's musical story that stared him straight in the face, forcing him to think about real values. In the quiet of the office, lit by the soft glow of the desk lamps, David and Emily searched together for the strength to continue the fight. He reminded her that music is not just notes or public performances, but the ability to change the world around you and your inner state. Emily, looking into the eyes of her mentor, felt that this fight was worth all the sacrifices. They came up with a plan that could not only protect her, but also become the beginning of a new path for their musical collaboration. The gates of trust were now wide open in their relationship. Every lesson, every rehearsal was given not only as technical achievements, but also as steps toward mutual healing and inner liberation. Zoe and Lionel, faithful companions of the young and adult heroes, never left them for a moment, supporting them with warm words and deeds. They became the invisible support needed to resist the power hidden not only within the walls of the school, but also in the hearts of influential people. And so, accompanied by questioning glances and mysterious pauses, the first pages of their shared story were written, where the light of hope broke through pain and resistance. These moments became the beginning of a profound exchange, of music and souls, stories of the past and bold plans for the future. Their unexpected union was not just a smile of fate, but a vow to walk together along a road that each was afraid to walk alone. And even though the battle for recognition was just beginning, this chapter became a symbol of the first revelation of two people who had lost and found each other, persistent, fragile, and strong at the same time. Music, like a living being, united them, promising that there were new heights ahead and, perhaps, salvation from their own fears. Their path was just gaining strength, and fate was preparing questions for them that had no answers yet. Together they entered the dark corridor, illuminated by the faint flickering light of the lanterns, and from afar the sounds of music complemented the fragile calm. David's gaze met Emily's, filled with expectation and faith in a miracle. This was the beginning of the story that would change their lives forever, revealing new facets of art, human hearts, and the endless power of mentoring. Musical revival and the first obstacles. In the dim light of the school's music room, David Miller carefully removed his long-forgotten violin from its case. The autumn wind slid past the windows of the elite school, but inside, there was a warmth that filled the space with notes that seemed almost alive. He squinted, touching the bow with fingers that seemed at once foreign and familiar. Emily Carter sat across from him, clutching her violin, old and covered in small scratches. But in her gaze there was the same fire of sincere passion that had once flared in the hands of her teacher. The smooth movement of the beginning of the lesson seemed to melt the ice in David's soul. This sound awakened something long lost in him. The room filled with subtle tremors as their bows crossed in duet. Emily, no expert in technique or status, sounded sincere and powerful, and David, feeling his own emotions building, gradually opened up, as if signaling a forgotten talent to come back to life. Each chord told a story of pain, hope, and struggle. His fingers, trained for the pompous concerts of the past, now trembled over the strings not with pride but with a sense of salvation. Emily listened with wide eyes, as if she saw before her not just a teacher but a person who had managed to find a new, inspiring path. Meanwhile, the hallways of the school were buzzing with the whispers and glances typical of an elite school. Olivia Spencer, the daughter of a powerful media mogul, watched Emily's newfound popularity with cold disdain. Her arrogance was evident in every word and movement as she spoke to classmate Cassandra Brooks. Their gaze, filled with smirks and sly innuendos, was like a shadow hanging over Emily and David's small world. Outside the classroom, in the luxurious offices, Mrs. Spencer was already discussing with Headmaster Thomas Bennett ways to strengthen her daughter's power while eliminating any threat to the family's status. The influence she skillfully deployed was beginning to transform the school into a battleground for influence and recognition. Late one evening, after most of the students had left the building, Emily reappeared in the music room. She was quietly stroking the bow of her old violin, trying to calm the turmoil in her heart. She didn't have her own expensive model, and it was this very deficiency that made her vulnerable to her peers. At that moment, David approached her. His eyes, usually closed to the world by cynicism, now shone with quiet support. He didn't scold her, but on the contrary offered help. Additional lessons, where there would be no rules and indifference, but only music and mutual understanding. This outburst of kindness became Emily's first breath of fresh air in the dusty room of despair. Their relationship gradually transformed during lessons. Emily spoke of her mother, who was not only her first music teacher, but also the gentle light of her childhood. These memories came alive in her hands and music, breaking through the pain of loss. David shared his story of falling when a series of failures led to alienation from himself and his calling. A deep emotional connection developed between them, based on mutual acceptance and the desire to breathe meaning into music again. Their classes resembled a dance of the soul, where each movement complemented each other and pushed them towards progress. With each passing day, the school became an increasingly violent arena. Olivia Spencer, pushing ahead with her plans, used every influence she had to create obstacles for Emily. Her rival, Cassandra, kept up the intrigues, juggling rumors and social games. Mrs. Spencer, meanwhile, increased the pressure on the administration, demanding a revision of the student development course and, in particular, discipline among those outside the circle. Principal Thomas Bennett finds himself in a difficult position trying to balance the demands of the Spencer family with his responsibility to maintain honesty and fairness at the academy. The confrontation was stressful, but it was precisely this that spurred David to an inner rebirth. With each joint performance, he returned to true creativity, to the places of pain and joy that once fed his talent. He saw Emily not just as a student, but as a symbol of hope, a new impulse for himself in the school. Every note of their duet was a story of struggle, overcoming, and mutual salvation. While the walls of the academy kept secrets, their music became a protest against prejudices and restrictions, opening the doors to a future where dreams could become reality. The shadows of school were gathering, the intrigues and accusations crowding out the peaceful melodies of daytime classes. Emily and Zoe Wells, her loyal friend, were plotting how to withstand the onslaught of a hostile environment. Their dialogues were filled with hope, support, and thorny determination. David found strength in the small details, in Emily's smiles, in her willingness to follow through. Together they were creating something more than just mentorship, a true renaissance of art and soul that threatened to shatter the wall of elitist snobbery that waited for them behind the scenes. A new milestone in their shared history was approaching, and each step was becoming more and more decisive. Their music, filled with inner struggle and sincere faith, was preparing to break through the noise and opposition. And the more the tension around them grew, the brighter the flame shone, illuminating their path forward, the path to recognition, redemption, and the victory of the spirit over circumstances. As they awaited the new chapter of their shared journey, there was only one thing left to do: gather strength and be ready to face the inevitable trials. As David and Emily set out to face the day, they sensed that there was more to come than just musical battles. Their bond transcended the format of master classes, embracing the depths of personality and the complex interweaving of destinies. The challenges they would both face would change not only their roles at the school, but also their outlook on life, love, and art. And this is what the world behind the curtain where the sounds of the violin filled the silence with hope and the grandeur of future achievements was waiting for. Shadows of the elite and pressure from power. The air in the headmaster's spacious office was thin, as if the air were being squeezed by invisible pressure and obsession with power. Thomas Bennett sat at the massive desk, his silver-haired face looking tired but not less resilient. In front of him, like messengers from different worlds, sat Mrs. Spencer, with her cold, penetrating gaze, and David Miller, deep down hard, but hiding a weariness and intransigence. This meeting was far from a simple discussion of school matters. The fate of young Emily Carter and perhaps a new page in David's life was being decided here. Mrs. Spencer opened the conversation with skill and sarcasm, playing on the principal's feelings and reminding her family of its illustrious past, the influential circles in which they moved, and the mission of maintaining the school's high status. "I respect your desire to support talent," she said with a cool tone, "but cases like Carter's cannot be allowed to tarnish the reputation of the institution. This girl is not our specialty, and Olivia's family situation requires special attention." There was more than just criticism in her voice, but a harsh, ultimatum-like note that emphasized the inexorability of her position. David, aware that Emily's success in the previous lesson and their activities together had become the subject of gossip and resentment from other parents, leaned his palms on the table, trying to convey his argument without unnecessary emotional pain. "Emily is not just an exception to the rule," he began confidently. "She is a person of unparalleled talent and incredible inner strength. I see a spark in her that you may not be able to see because of your social class and personal ambitions." His words echoed throughout the room, holding a hidden threat and hope at the same time. Mrs. Spencer grinned in response, then nodded toward Olivia, who stood in the corner, playing with her fingernail, her defiant dislike for the scholarship student on full display. "Your passion for music, Mr. Miller, is no excuse for breaking the norm. We have other students with rich backgrounds and impeccable pedigrees who deserve our attention and resources." Her words sounded like a judgment, but also like a challenge to David. Thomas remained silent, glancing occasionally at his notes and watching the voices rise. It was his duty to be a fair arbiter, but the fate of the school hung in the balance between tradition and the changes brought on by the likes of Emily. He knew that a desperate struggle for status and position could destroy a genuine discovery. "We must find a compromise," he said at last, "that will take into account the interests of all parties and ensure the future of the school without discriminating against talent." Here David proposed a project that raised eyebrows and interest. They could create a special program to support students with non-standard backgrounds, giving them a chance to realize their potential without damaging their reputation. This initiative could become a bridge between the elite and talent, between tradition and progress. The proposal seemed reasonable, but Mrs. Spencer received it with caution, as if she knew that she would lose complete control. As the discussion turned to informal conversation, Lionel James, David's old friend and colleague, suddenly appeared in the room. His presence brought an unexpected note of support and strength. "If you want to keep real music in this place," he whispered to David, "you're going to have to fight this battle. But I'm sure you have a chance." The words became a quiet song of hope, filling the mentor's heart with new determination. Meanwhile, outside the office in the hallway, Emily was talking to Zoe Wells, her loyal friend. They were discussing the upcoming difficulties that hung right over the young musician's head. "They don't understand that music is more than status and money," Emily said, clutching her violin. "It's my life, my memory of my mother." Zoe, holding her tightly by the shoulders, assured her that together they would withstand any pressure. Relentlessly climbing the ladder to the top of the elite and running into deep chasms of prejudice, David and Emily slowly but surely became symbols of change. The arrival of Cassandra Brooks, a cold and cunning member of the student body, further confirmed the intensity of the struggle. She watched the events unfold with amusement, and her plan was to devalue Emily's talents in everyone's eyes by highlighting the differences in background and opportunity. In tense conversations, manipulations, and subtle games of influence, the school became an arena not only for musical art, but also for social battles, where each party took a step toward its victory or defeat. At this moment, the fate of not only the mentor and the protege, but also the entire educational community balanced on the edge of expectation and struggle. Outside the fractious Boston skyline, where the cold winds of change blew, David and Emily prepared for the next stage of their journey. They knew that the trials were just beginning, and only by joining forces and their inner truth would they be able to conquer the peaks and tear down the walls built around the elite and power. Thus, in the shadow of ambition and pressure, a support for true art was born, ready to stand up against obstacles. The moment had come when music could speak louder than all words, and Emily's voice, inspired by her mentor, promised to change not only their lives but also the school itself, whose soul demanded redemption and renewal. The continuation of this struggle foreshadowed new turns, where the strength of spirit and inspiration collided with the cruelty of privilege and prejudice. Desperate attempts to hold on to the light. David Miller has long understood that the whirlwind of school days does not forgive mistakes, and routine often kills the passion for music itself. For several years now, he has been greeting bright mornings in the gloomy office of his studio, where dust on the instruments reminds him of the silent promises of the past. These days, every bell is like an echo of a long-forgotten call, and his thoughts increasingly take him away from lessons to where life and hope once boiled. But today, a little later than usual, something new appears in the atmosphere, a slight vibration of hope, which comes with an unexpected meeting. A small group of those who really attracted attention gathered near the doors. A complex web of intrigue swirled in the air. Among them was Lionel James, David's old comrade, the man whose advice had once saved him from falling. They exchanged a look of unspoken understanding. The tension increased as Director Thomas Bennett appeared in the corridor, a figure that seemed to personify strict order and the need to keep everything under control. To their surprise, he was accompanied by Zoe Wells, Emily's loyal friend, whose devotion to the girl was known far beyond the classroom. Emily and Zoe stepped into the hallway with a determined expression, as if they were about to fight for honor and the right to music. Emily's every move reflected long hours of struggle against the odds and an unending determination not to give in. As they pushed open the door to the classroom, the auditorium, where they usually rehearsed, they immediately felt the cold tension. Cassandra Brooks, so graceful in her aristocratic dislike, sat with a frown, studying the new rumors that had spread through the school like smoke. Her gaze was sharp and venomous, like a gnawing fear of losing control. The inability to remain silent was becoming a painful game in the shadows behind the scenes of the Music Academy. Olivia Spencer, with the cold pride of a media mogul's daughter, had discovered the trump cards that led to success: pressure, intrigue, and subtle manipulation. Her mother, Mrs. Spencer, was at that moment preparing a new move aimed at undermining the reputation of Emily and her teacher. Aware of the threat, David immediately began to gather allies. His meeting with Lionel James took place in a cozy cafe, where the subtle smells of freshly ground coffee and sweet desserts seemed to muffle the arena of future confrontations. "You are not alone in this fight," Lionel said, nodding with conviction. Together, they planned to create a program to support talented students from humble backgrounds who had found themselves in the shadow of the school's opulent halls. For them, the initiative meant more than just protection. It was a symbol of the revival of the true values of the arts. At the same time, Principal Thomas Bennett remained at a crossroads. On one hand, the pressure of the powers that be above the school. On the other, the desire to preserve its reputation and the desire for justice. While David and Lionel made plans, Zoe supported Emily, engaging in deep conversations about fears and hopes. In a cozy corner of the school library, the girls discussed every detail of the events, trying to figure out how to maintain the musical path that had become more than just a hobby for Emily. Her eyes sparkled with determination, despite the shadow of sadness that sometimes appeared when she thought of her mother. "We will get through this together," Zoe whispered through tears, promising loyalty and protection. And that evening, Mrs. Spencer came into the principal's office. Her speech was cool and collected, each word spoken with the intention of striking precisely at the center of the conflict. She insisted that Emily be removed from high-profile speeches and David be relegated to less visible duties, citing balance and priorities. Thomas listened attentively, internally struggling with the need to balance and loyalty to his convictions. But human justice gradually emerged within, like the quiet voice of conscience. In response, David requested a special audience with the Board of Trustees. Supported by Lionel and Thomas, he presented a program that would not only keep Emily on the road, but open doors for many others. The arguments were built on sincerity and evidence, a deep understanding of music and its power, regardless of social status. Every moment was imbued with passion and a genuine belief that art is not subject to the rules of money and influence. Meanwhile, tensions were rising at school. Cassandra and Olivia combined their efforts to fuel the fire of rumors and misunderstandings. To add to the difficulties, relationships between students and their teachers became a subject of debate, and the opinions of influential parents became increasingly important. In this struggle, Emily and David's inner world grew stronger. They found new strength in each other's support and faith in a common cause. One of the defining moments was a rehearsal in the old school concert hall, where Emily's violin and David's harmonious chords seemed to merge into one. The evening was not only about music, but also about a silent protest against injustice. Moments filled with the light and shadow of struggle became a symbol of rebirth and a promise of the future. The cries of the outside world were gradually drowned out by the sounds of true creativity. The final step of preparation for the meeting with the council required strength and endurance from everyone. Lionel's support, Thomas's determination, and David and Emily's undisguised mutual faith created a solid foundation for the further struggle. They were ready to defend the light that burned in the girl's eyes and in the teacher's heart, despite the darkness of intrigue and pressure. The climax was already approaching. The moment of truth would inevitably follow. The path to saving musical dreams was just beginning. The confrontations promised to be cruel, but those who found allies and courage were finally reborn with confidence. Step by step, they walked towards the goal, not allowing fear and doubt to destroy what was built on passion and sincerity. The light of hope that had previously burned in Emily's heart was now transmitted to everyone around, and music was once again becoming the voice of souls capable of changing the world. Through unpredictable twists and turns and trials within the walls of an elite school of growing up and fighting, the story of David and Emily continued to evolve. Their path, paved with confrontation and the pursuit of justice, prepared the ground for the next chapters of their destiny, full of hope, new discoveries, and the final victory of the soul over circumstances. New challenges awaited them ahead, but now they are strong in unity and mutual support, ready to turn every chord into a hymn of victory. The climax is on the verge of breaking. The darkness of the hall was only slightly reflected in the polished surfaces of the instruments when the first chords of Emily's violin filled the space like the breath of life itself. David, sitting nearby, felt the cold of cynicism slowly give way to a cautious warmth. His fingers did not dare touch the antique violin lying in his lap, but his heart responded to every stroke woven from the pain and hope of his student. The hall was filled not only with students and teachers, but also with the most important members of the Board of Trustees, including Mrs. Spencer. Her icy gaze did not miss a single movement of Emily. A weight of doubt hung on David's shoulders. Would he be able to preserve not only the honor of music, but also the fate of the young violinist who had become the meaning of his fading world? As the harmony reached its climax, Emily's bow suddenly trembled in the hands of her confident mentor. Their sounds merged into a single breath, immersing the listeners in a whirlwind of emotions. This duet was not just a performance. It was an atonement woven from the losses experienced. Each stroke spoke without words, revealing deep wounds and the hope for healing. At that moment, the spotlight was on the long-awaited boardroom, where Principal Thomas opened the case under the stern gaze of Mrs. Spencer. Her voice, icy as glass, was blaring accusations of bias and disregard for standards. David listened, feeling a fire blaze inside him at the need to fight not for his own ego, but for a student whose talent might be stifled by the ambitions of the elite. The dialogue took sharp turns. Olivia, led by her mother, backed up every accusation with impersonal words, seizing on every opportunity to undermine the trust in her mentor and his protege. And David, gathering all his remaining strength, gave a fiery speech in which there was neither a plea nor a threat, only a firm belief in music as a force capable of changing lives and breaking down walls of misunderstanding. He reminded the crowd that the Academy was not there to maintain the status quo, but to nurture talent, regardless of social status. His words cut through the silence, making everyone who was used to looking at success through the prism of money and connections think. Emily, watching from the stage, felt the walls of doubt crumble, and with them, the fears of the past. Meanwhile, Cassandra, one of the old guard of students, was retreating into the shadows, a shadow of her own ambitions. Lionel James, David's former colleague, was encouraging his friend with short words of encouragement, reminding him that it was time to stop being afraid of his own shadow. Zoe stood quietly next to Emily, holding her hand, conveying her unconditional faith and support. The performance was a turning point that changed the atmosphere in the academy forever. It was as if the music had revealed the invisible threads that connected hearts, and that evening, even the harshest critics could not turn away from the purity and sincerity of art. David felt how from the deep inner darkness a light was born, breaking through the clouds of disappointment. The fight against the system was brutal and sometimes merciless, but the determination of the musicians, whose souls were inflamed by real passion, proved stronger than intrigue and pressure. For the first time in a long time, a note of real hope sounded within the walls of the school, where art became a bridge between worlds divided by social boundaries and personal tragedies. As the spotlight slowly faded and the room cleared of applause, everyone realized that the great battle was just beginning. The sides mapped out new positions, and David and Emily, united by an unwavering will, prepared for the coming test that would determine their future and the future of those who came after. Gradually fading into dozens of trembling sounds, their music left a fiery spark in the hearts of listeners, forever changing the view of what true mastery means. Its sound became a prophecy of changes that no one can stop, and with this thought, a new stage of the path began, full of hopes and accomplishments. Victory of the spirit and new horizons. There is a deep satisfaction in overcoming difficult challenges that sometimes seem insurmountable, and that feeling was everywhere in the Academy's rehearsal room that evening. Emily sat in a chair near the piano, her eyes shining with joy, and in her hands, she clutched her acceptance letter to a prestigious music academy. Watching her, David felt his breath fill with quiet delight, as if for the first time in many years he could feel the true power of music, the power to heal and restore. The great efforts he made to live up to the hopes of a girl from a humble neighborhood now have a name. The standoff was not merely formal, it was a real battle for Emily's right to the future she deserved. The Board of Trustees, under pressure from Mrs. Spencer, who personified elitist disdain, tried to squeeze the talented young scholarship winner out of the academy. But David weighed in with passion and sincerity, convincing the board that music was not just a matter of wealth or connections. His speech to the board, filled with examples of Emily's drive and extraordinary abilities, was heartfelt and persuasive. He didn't just fight for his student, he defended the ideals of art and human dignity. Olivia Spencer, accustomed to unconditional attention and respect, suffered a bitter defeat. Her arrogance and artificial superiority could not overshadow Emily's natural spark, and this fact remained undeniable for everyone present at the council. The mother's outbursts of indignation, the shouts of reproach at David, the attempts to manipulate and intimidate, all this crashed against the wave of support that surrounded the ward and her mentor. In the end, Principal Thomas, a strict but fair man, was forced to acknowledge the weight of Miller's arguments and allow the girl to continue her studies. The school was filled with sounds of celebration after the decision was made. Zoe Wells, Emily's loyal friend, beamed with happiness, hugging her so tightly that it seemed she was about to transfer all her pent-up energy to her. Cassandra Brooks, a member of the elite, wavered between regret and admiration, realizing that this evening had seen a paradigm shift in their small but strict art world. The atmosphere of the lively celebration could not fail to touch Lionel James, David's old friend, whose sincere smiles and warm words of support were a real consolation in moments of doubt. This triumph was more than just a battle won. For Emily, it meant an opportunity to grow further, to develop a unique voice, and to give the world the depth of feelings that she inherited from her mother. For David, it was a new hope and meaning in life that he had lost in the past, mired in cynicism and despair. His meeting with Emily was a turning point that allowed him to let go of the past again and open the door to a future where music plays the role of not only a profession, but also a living dialogue of hearts. In the coming weeks, the academy was transformed. Instead of tense stares and latent hostility, there was respect and camaraderie. Emily steadily improved her performances, and lessons with David were filled not only with technical exercises, but also with discussions of the emotions, cultural layers, and personal experiences that make up the fabric of each piece. Together, they created unforgettable moments. Quiet late-night rehearsals, where the violin melodiously embraces the silence, and thunderous chords that make souls tremble. Meanwhile, Mrs. Spencer's pressure continued, but the odds were against her. The parent body, seeing the results of David's work and the sincere gratitude of the students, was increasingly inclined to support the new approaches. Principal Thomas's meetings regularly included words of encouragement for the informal mentoring program that helped to reveal the talents of those who had previously remained in the shadows. Thus began a project to support young musicians from less affluent areas of Boston, an idea inspired by Emily's case. It was the evening of the farewell concert at the Academy, where the students demonstrated the achievements of the year. The poster announced a joint performance by David and Emily, a duet that became a symbol of overcoming and rebirth. The hall was full of emotions. Teachers, students, parents, everyone held their breath. In the spotlight, a sincere, deep melody sounded through the resonator of the violin, a story told without words, filled with pain, hope, and joy. Each movement of the bow carried with it an experience and sentimentality that only the two of them could convey. The performance ended with standing ovations and tears of joy flowing from many of the audience. At that moment, the world seemed filled with possibilities, freedom to create and change. David, looking at Emily smiling, realized that they had both come a long way through trials and doubts to a new beginning. They were allies in the fight for the love of music and freedom of expression. The upcoming changes are not only coming in Emily's life. David has begun to think about reviving his own career as a performer, but not for the sake of fame or recognition, but for the sake of transmitting music as a living, breathing art. His ideas for creating a program to support young talents from low-income backgrounds received a positive response from the Academy administration, and he was full of new strength to take on this difficult but fateful task. Meanwhile, Emily was working hard to get into the music academy, developing her skills and self-confidence under the watchful eye of her mentor, friend, and like-minded person. Zoe continued to play the role of support, helping to cope with stress and anxiety, and Olivia realized more and more every day that true value is not in status, but in the sincerity of talent and perseverance. Their stories, intertwined by the events of this difficult school year, were just beginning to take on new meaning. The forces that seemed lost forever took on a new appearance and were filled with light. A path with unlimited possibilities unfolded before them, where they walked confidently and decisively, two people who had changed each other and were ready to create a new musical chapter of their lives together. While the last chord sounded in the memory of the listeners, a new page loomed ahead, filled with challenges and victories, difficulties and discoveries. It is this road that will become the subject of the following story, in which David and Emily take another step towards their true purpose. Sounds of hope and future stars. The Academy of Arts' farewell chord sounded more than just the end of another academic year. It became the beginning of a new chapter for David Miller, a personal rebirth filled with the meaning that seemed long lost. Returning to an active career as a performer, he now saw not only his own successes, but also a reflection of the hopes that were invested in each student whose soul he touched with music. The lessons of mentoring were not limited to the sounds of the violin or the melodies of the piano. They spoke of a deep understanding of life and art, destinies woven by invisible threads of time. The project David launched with director Thomas grew out of a vision of making music accessible to talented kids from underprivileged Boston neighborhoods. The support he sought to provide was not just a social initiative. It was a bridge between worlds, separated by economic and cultural barriers. Emily Carter became not only a symbol of this hope, but also the first example of the wonders that a genuine passion for music can create when it meets care and the opportunity to blossom. Emily, already prepared to enter a prestigious music academy, sang to her friends and mentors not so much about the past, but about the future, which was painted in bright colors of open horizons. Zoe Wells, with whom she went through trials and disappointments, remained close, supporting, and inspiring. Their friendship, painstakingly built on mutual understanding and trust, became one of the strong supports of both a new stage and memories that fueled the determination to move forward. David was undergoing a metamorphosis, not only in his technical skill, but also in his perception of life. By reconnecting with the violin, the instrument that had once witnessed his great triumphs and bitter defeats, he found wholeness. Together with Lionel James, an old friend and colleague, they planned concerts and masterclasses so that things would not just be musical events, but real meetings of hearts and minds. Each performance contained a part of a life's journey, turning art into a testimony of what was experienced, passed through, and rediscovered. The difficulties he had experienced during the conflict with Mrs. Spencer and some of the board members now seemed merely a prelude to change. David had stood his ground with restraint and wisdom, demonstrating the value of intangible wealth, that which cannot be bought or imposed from the outside. His compromise with the headmaster was not a capitulation, but a strategy for maintaining a sincere approach to teaching. Victories of this kind were more powerful, for they forged the spirit and strengthened the trust between mentor and mentee. Olivia Spencer, watching Emily's triumphs and David's recovery, increasingly lost ground in the school's true hierarchy, where talent and perseverance became the measure of success, not birth. The struggle that unfolded among students and parents gradually gave way to respect for those who walked the path of self-knowledge, carrying music in their hearts as light and salvation. Feelings of envy gave way to internal changes, many of which occurred quietly but deeply, thanks to the power of art, overcoming all barriers. Principal Thomas continued to lead the school, both strict and fair, creating a balance between tradition and new trends. His support for the program developed by David was not just an administrative step, but a significant response to the challenges of the time. It was in this union of experience and youthful impetus, responsibility and dreams, that a new era was born, where music was not just a subject of study, but life, pouring out into every note, every word and look. Emily was leaving the academy, and the mentor who had become her support and light in the darkest days. The farewell against the backdrop of autumn leaves painted gold was filled with tears and laughter, promises and plans, everything that gives meaning to the path of growing up. She left for the music academy with a feeling of gratitude, but also with complete confidence that ahead was only her own story, where every note would sound from the heart. David, still at the academy, saw his mission more clearly than ever. His career had reconnected with his life, like a violin beginning to sound after a long period of silence. Inspired by his mentoring experience, he conceived a program of support for young musicians with difficult lives, wanting to give them hope as pure and alive as he saw in Emily's playing. It was not just a job or a hobby. It was a life's work, the fruit of deep inner healing. The dawns of new days brought not just the promise of change, but their real embodiment. Each concert, each rehearsal was filled with the energy and passion that through difficulties and doubts found its place in the hearts of all participants. This world, united by the melodies of human destinies, became a home for David and his students, in which disparate parts of the past were collected into a picture of a living, rich life. Close relationships with friends and colleagues grew stronger, giving strength for new creativity. Lionel, who always found words of support in the right accents, became an integral part of the project, helping to turn ideas into real events. Together they created a platform where music told the stories of souls redeemed through sincerity and the courage to move forward no matter what. The story of David and Emily became an example of how through mentorship and understanding it is possible to resurrect forgotten dreams, overcome internal conflicts, and build bridges between worlds. Their paths, intertwined at the crossroads of time, gave each other the strength to move forward, enriched their hearts, and allowed them to believe again in the miracle of music as the highest form of self-expression and amazing healing. Then they had to go through the path together, already with the awareness of the power and significance of the chosen growth. In this new stage of life, music and hope became inseparable companions, illuminating even the darkest days with warmth and light. They knew that there were still many trials ahead, but they were no longer afraid of loneliness or failure. Together, supporting each other like a string quartet, they were ready to withstand any storm to create melodies that filled the hearts of listeners with true life and the power of transformation. These sounds, born of pain and love, became the beginning of an infinitely beautiful story that continued and promised much ahead.